Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, preparing to check in on a couple of my worm bins. Looks like I haven't turned all the lights on yet. I'll have to take care of that before we start rolling. The bins that we're going to be checking in on are right over my shoulder here. Let's see if we can give you a quick view of them before we bring them out onto the bench. There are these two systems stacked one on top of the other. They've got European night crawlers living in them. And the systems have sort of a novelty material running in them. There are a couple of t-shirts that we placed in there quite a long time ago, 89 days ago now. I got some other stats about these systems on my little green information board, so let's get these systems out on the bench, turn on some lights, slip on a glove, and get to work on feeding these little guys. Alright, so a good number of the information bits on this board have already been touched on. The fact that these are European night crawlers, the fact that we're running t-shirts in here that have been in here for 89 days. So let's see what else we got. The systems are now 134 days of age at this point, fed 11 times. No, fed 12 times, feeding number 13 going in today. The interval between feedings on this occasion was 11 days, and 11 days ago the thing that they were fed was just a half a head of cabbage into each system. So I had this little frozen head of cabbage that I was able to cut more or less down the middle and place into each system as just a single lump of food. And it was frozen, so I even had a hard time cutting it in half, so to have been able to fragment it into smaller bits wouldn't have really been an option last time. So the half heads of cabbage went in here whole. And I'm definitely curious to see how much progress they've made over the past 11 days. Looks like we've got some worms interested in hanging out here on the surface. You know, with that bubble wrap sitting out here, there's moisture recirculating. Whoa, I just saw like a little undulation of material. You see that? It looks like the head of cabbage might have a little bit of a worm party going on down there, which I guess would sort of make sense. Here I don't see as many little bits of castings material breaching the surface, but here it looks like the worms have been traveling up and down, depositing castings along the way. And I mean, there was just a shredded leaf top dressing applied to the whole system out here last time, so the worms definitely left that there. It wasn't part of our last check-in to be left that way. So I'm going to try to hang on to these feeding zone indicators, since today's feeding does not include coffee or coffee filters. So we'll recycle those as our feeding zone indicators when we're finished here. The stuff that we're feeding them today is kind of, I don't know, what do we got here? We got potato peel. We've got my worm chow. Here's another small particle material. It's just some walnut that had been ground up really fine. And this here, yeah, you know what that is. No, it's not that. It's shredded coconut. A little bit that was left over from the preparation of a little pastry treat, which seemed like, hey, why not give it to the wormies? I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Here and there I'm bumping into things that are larger bits of leftover food, chunks of corn cob. In fact, earlier I think I had even encountered a little round disc of corn cob. Sometimes I'll go to the trouble of actually taking corn cob and hacking it into little circular discs. Other times I just throw it in and allow nature to take its course in the worm bin, let the worms break it down to the point where it softens up enough so I can fragment it into smaller pieces. And as for all this leafy material, you know, I'm wondering if maybe we can try to salvage a good bit of it and use it as the foundation for today's feeding. Why don't we do that? We'll gather up some of the stuff that we pushed off to the side and mound it up over here and introduce it down into the feeding area. And then all those things that we're feeding them, whether it's the potato peels, whether it's the shredded walnut, whether it's the shredded coconut, all those little relatively small particle size things will, I think, blend in quite nicely with all of this this nice leafy material. The worms won't even know whether they're dealing with bedding or food or what, but hopefully they'll just nibble the majority of it away. The stuff we sprinkled down underneath the feeding last time was also just a bunch of dry leaves, which we had actually treated with a little bit of moisture. We sprayed it down. Since it did seem like a pretty good amount of dry material being added, it seemed like a sensible idea to try to dampen it a little bit. Here and there, as I encounter a chunk of corn cob, that's usually what I'm doing when I'm kind of getting sidetracked a little bit with some sort of object that I had just located, is me just trying to bust those things up into smaller and smaller pieces. In a way, my fingers keep probing around, thinking I'm going to bump into a somewhat larger object eventually. And I guess what I'm looking for is the half a head of cabbage. Because in a way, I thought that I'd encounter a large leftover lump of that stuff. But to me, it just seems like they've come in here and just gobbled the whole thing up. Leaving in between the leftover castings little things that won't go quite as quickly as cabbage, such as what remains of the t-shirt. Over here in bin number 1, the t-shirt was printed with Microsoft information, something to do with Microsoft Office, I believe. And over in bin number 2, there was a t-shirt from an optical media management software package, Roxio Toast. And I believe that other than the corn cob, which is totally expected to take a long time in the worm bin, as well as the cotton, obviously, another thing that's going to be expected to take a long time in the worm bin, I don't think we're really seeing a whole lot of leftovers of the cabbage they got last time. I guess the one remnant is the worm party. Worms hanging out, enjoying what remains. I think I do smell a little bit of cabbage here, though. There is a little bit of a odor to it, a little bit cabbagey. So even though I'm not really visually seeing any of it, perhaps there is just a little bit of it remaining after 11 days. And a good number of worms coming out to work it down. As time goes by, I think it's going to become harder and harder to find scraps of the leftover cotton bits of the t-shirt. We do keep on trying to spread the material out in such a way that it's easily accessible by worms from all directions. So like there's a pretty good size fragment. Let me just see if I can capture some of these chunks that fell off my hand when I was holding the worms there. There was also some stuff over here in front of me that I noticed. So the t-shirt is definitely coming along pretty nicely. This right here, just based on its color, could this be leftover cabbage? No, this I think is, or is it? I don't even know. It's just so bright in color, and just how the, yeah, you know, just from the look of the leaves, I believe that this might actually be leftovers of the cabbage. Certainly not much. And maybe there's more of it in here, like this right here. We didn't go too overboard digging around looking. Perhaps if we did, we'd find more of it. But I guess the main thing of interest in here is not so much the cabbage, it's the t-shirt. Look at all these worms. They're just all over the place. I'm definitely smelling a little bit of cabbagey smell. So besides those larger sections of the remaining fabric over here, I believe that the main thing that remains is just all of this stitching that goes around the sleeves, around the neck, over the shoulders. And somehow I think they're all connected, and I think that they're all just going to stay connected to the tag as well. That's the only stuff that I think is going to remain of these t-shirts. when all is said and done. I've got a feeling that they're just going to be able to nibble every other last little bit of cotton fabric off that stuff and leave us only with that stuff that they're just simply unable to eat. And when we get to that point, we'll just extract it, since, you know, there's no sense of it being in here if there's really nothing left for the worms to consume. So yeah, it's pretty busy bins. You know, I think the population in these bins is pretty close, but not exact. We estimated that bin number 1, I believe, has 1,890 worms in it, and over here in bin number 2, I think it's 1,880. So I mean, it would be simple enough to just take 5 worms and move them over, and then start treating these as twin bins with identical populations. But you know, for systems that have now been in service for, let me peek over there again, I can't remember, 134 days, it's fairly likely that over that time there's been a little bit of worm mating going on here, with perhaps some babies being born here and there. So you never know. Perhaps the system that we estimated to have fewer worms in it has now actually surpassed the other bin in population. Now here it definitely looks to me like there's a larger hunk of clearly identifiable head of cabbage, which is interesting enough. And I don't think that difference of 10 worms is the reason. I don't know what the reason is, but maybe one of the halves of the head of cabbage were a little bit bigger than the other. I do remember when I was cutting it in half, it just didn't seem like I could get it perfectly divided into 2 equal halves. So that might be the explanation for it. And look at all these worms. They're certainly enjoying this feeding. They came out in great numbers to enjoy that head of cabbage. This was really kind of what I expected to find in both systems, was a pretty good lump of leftover material still needing to be eaten. So it was a little bit surprising over here in bin number 1 to find so little leftover cabbage. So here too, this stuff I believe is just paper. This is just newspaper, which had been part of our top covering. Last time we still saw little bits and pieces of top covering newspaper, but it eventually just got blended in as, you know, supplementary bedding throughout the system. And the only thing we left as a top covering in here last time was just leafy matter scattered about. So we've definitely got ourselves nice, busy feeding area over here. Before we drop in the food that they're getting today, let's see about checking out how the t-shirt is progressing. Now this was the Roxio t-shirt, like I said earlier. Both of these t-shirts I really liked. They were both really cool t-shirts. Look at the size of this piece of corn cob. Makes me wonder why I hadn't broken it up in previous check-ins. Oops. Because that's kind of my new thing, in case you haven't noticed. So let's see. So there are little fragments of cotton still along this piece of stitching. And then as we follow it around, here's the tag from the back of the neck, you know, showing where the back of the shirt is, the back of the garment. Here too, interestingly enough, the worms really do seem to really enjoy hanging out in these threads. I wonder why. Perhaps exactly because of the fact that they don't break down, because they're sort of a material that they see as more as bedding, perhaps, than as food. I don't know, but I think that's about it as far as leftovers on that Roxio t-shirt. And I think this over here is about it as far as leftovers on the cabbage they got last time. And once again, I'm bumping into little pieces of corn cob here and there that I just feel compelled to try to break when I find them. This little piece of corn cob might have actually still been tubular in shape, and when I just snapped it, I think I sort of exposed its inside that was seemingly full of little worms enjoying the meal left for them there. But you know, I think we've had our fun here. It's time to just give them their food and then return them to peace. Lots of worms in here. Definitely two busy bins. Somehow, I don't know why, but I get this weird feeling like bin number 2 has a greater number of worms, but I doubt that that's the case. It's more likely that they are quite equal in the worm count. I do trust the estimates of the viewers, and that's how we arrive at the worm count in my systems, is just basically polling the viewers whenever I launch a new system, and then I just average everyone's estimates, and that's how we came up with what we believe to be the worm count in these two systems. So before we drop in the foods that I've got for them today, let's get on restoring the leftover cabbage and some of this collected top seasoning, dressing, whatever you want to call it, of leafy matter. We'll do the same over here too before we proceed. Then we could begin dropping in the potato. Oh yeah, but let's not forget, I like the idea of putting what remains of these t-shirts into a spot where I believe it's going to get a maximum amount of worm traffic. And somehow I believe by putting it here, right underneath where the foods are going to be, and right on top of this nice seasoned bedding material, it's a really good spot, you know. But let's cover up whatever worms are in that material with a little bit of this dry, semi-dry, collected leafy matter that we assembled, because this stuff here is frozen for the most part. I mean, I removed it from the freezer a little while ago, so it's not all completely frozen, but it's cold enough that I sometimes feel like I don't want to dump it straight onto worms and cause them a bunch of discomfort. So I guess out of just courtesy for the worms, I try to shield them from some of these frozen foods before placing them into the worm bins. And then here, all this shredded walnut, I have to assume they're going to like this too, and there's a good bit of it. Let's see if we can distribute this in a fairly fair and even way. Okay. That pretty much accounts for all the shredded walnut, but let's not forget we've also got cocoa nut as well. Not so much of this, just a little bit, little scraps of chocolate in between. This stuff was just used to sort of dress up a couple of yummy little pastries. And then here, yet more white powdery looking stuff. Not powder though, definitely not powder. It's little fragments of eggshell pulverized into small size particle matter so that the worms can make use of it as a grit to help them break down the foods that they're consuming. So all we've really done here is examine the feeding area. We've not even really probed anywhere else in these systems, but I do kind of make it a habit usually to try to examine the entire contents of my systems when I come in to feed, just to make sure things are okay and in good shape. A lot of times when I hit a stick like this, I remove it, but it feels kind of soft. Maybe there's a chance of that actually breaking down in the bin, so I think I'll leave that one. And you know, sometimes I actually just skip tilling up the outer edges of the bins. Just, I guess for no other reason, perhaps just for the sake of mixing it up a little bit every now and again. So you know what? Why don't we do that just for that purpose today? We're going to skip tilling up the outer edges of the bins, even though there's probably a good number of worms hanging out there too. Today I think the main event was that little head of cabbage that was really bringing out a good number of worms to work the stuff down. And it was a little bit surprising to find a piece that large. Perhaps not that surprising. I guess after looking through bin number 1 and finding virtually no leftovers of the cabbage, it was a little bit surprising from that perspective. But to be honest, when I first came in here, I was sort of expecting to see good bits of leftover of that cabbage. So these little wormies have done a wonderful job working this stuff down. So let's bring back the bubble wrap. You know, I thought about perhaps adding even more top dressing leafy matter at the end of today's check-in. But like I said earlier, sometimes I like to change things up and vary my approach each time. So today I think just the introduction of the recovered top seasoning stuff to become the foundational bedding for the feeding was adequate. Yeah, you know, last time we did add a lot of leafy matter down the feeding zone, a lot of leafy matter across the top. So I think just by, you know, referring back to the last check-in 11 days ago and treating that as the reason to tell ourselves we don't need more today, that's usually enough for me. All right, everyone, I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up and put away. Not going to waste your time with that, though. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.